cheekbone. And there was a light on the nostril that I want to keep. And a light there. But other than that, I'm just going to create a water path to save my whites. There's very few whites. If you remember, the dominant tones are going to be half tone and reflected light. So I'm going to warn you ahead of time. I tend, when I'm really getting into a subject, I might lose my words. But I'm going to try to talk all the way through it. So I want to have a little bit of water out there. So I'm creating the background as I go. I don't want to paint the background as an afterthought. I'm just using the water to save the whites at this point. And I'm breaking the form with my water. Okay, so you can start to see the warp in the paper. Shows you where the paint is wet. So hopefully that's saved my whites. I've got a dry spot here. I don't know that I want. A dry spot there.
So you're basically using your study as a reference of where you don't want.
Right, so I'm finding those little squares of light that I mapped out. That's why I exaggerate the square, because that's where I want to save those highlights. It's virtually, well, it's not impossible. I can show you a method for getting whites back too. Just want to make sure I've got my, so there's a dry spot there. If you look at it sideways, you can see the dry spots better. So I've almost covered the whole paper with water. So I want to start adding color. So here we go. It gets kind of scary. So I want to use a higher value in the temple area, and as outside light tends to get cooler as it goes into the light. So I'm going to start with yellow just because yellow gets polluted easier. So I'm going to go into the pure yellow. I'm going to go ahead and break the form a little bit. And I'm going to kind of go to the blue in the outside light at the top of the head. And where they meet, it'll start to create a green tone. And I like to put the blue in the eye socket area and let it sort of drain down the head. And now we'll get into the prima donna, which is the red. So I'm going to start to build that shadow edge with the red. And I just want to get a half-tone base. And I want to make sure I keep the nose fairly warm and not lose all my highlights. The nasal area, especially the tip of the nose, I want to keep it quite warm. So my two warm colors are the red. I probably covered up my highlights there a little bit. Well, not worry about it too much. The critical one was on the cheek and on that nasal area there. And then when it gets down below the chin, I like to go back into the cool tones to create some purples. And the back of the head. And I'm just going to get my half-tone, sense of the half-tone. Where I mix the red and the blue, I get more of a purpley color. Around the ear and the nostrils, I want to keep it warm for this first pass. And I'm just warming up this gentleman has a little bit of facial hair, so I'm going to brown that down a little bit with all three colors. So we know when we're working with the primary color, so see there was a dry spot, so I'm just going to lose that. And I just want this to fade into nothing. So that's my first layer. This has got a little bit of blue, so I'm going to step back and evaluate a little bit. Got a little too blue up there, so I'm going to put some warm tones in there, especially as it comes down the head. So now I have a very wet surface, and the paint's flowing everywhere, which is really wonderful and fun. So while it's really wet, I want to thicken my paint a little bit. So I'm going to take some of my paint and I'm going to go right back into my mixing area and start to thicken my paint just a little bit. And while I'm doing this, I'm actually killing time a little bit while the paper dries back somewhat. I'm going to thicken all three of my paint sources into more of a medium tone paint. And I just want to call out some of the darker areas so that I can get some soft edges when I transition.
And Colleen, before you do that, Mary asks, can you explain your choices a bit more? So beyond I do this, but why exactly?